Are you guys hearing me at all? Is there still no sound? Let's try this again here. Transition over. Bear with me, guys. I don't know what's going on here today. All right. Can anybody hear me there? All right, cool. You guys got sound. Okay. All right. Sorry, guys. This craziness going on with the stream. I don't know what happened with the intro, but it all took a crap. So hopefully you guys can see me now. Are we live? Okay. Sorry, guys. Don't know what happened there, but hopefully everybody can realize that this I had to start a new stream for some reason. So, okay. People can hear me? All right, good. Right on. All right. So, got all kinds of topics I want to cover tonight. So, hopefully I can get past the fact that this stream didn't take off like I wanted it to. And we can get going. Sorry, I'm a little disheveled right now because of how that went down. So, hopefully you guys are doing all okay. I'm going to try to just move past this. So, I got a nice little list of things that I want to talk about, and then I want to get to questions in the chat for you guys, and hopefully I can answer them. So, Eric K., thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. Any of you guys that want to post questions, Justin and I will try to get to them. If you could please put them in caps lock, we'll try to do our best to get to all your guys' questions, okay? So what I'm going to do here is, hey, Zach, thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to pop out my chat. Again, everything got messed up. I don't know what happened here. So, all right. So we have, yeah, exactly. Trump tweeted again, took all the bandwidth. Now, it was my mixer for some reason. I don't know what it was. Like my mixer forgot. That's a LaCroix, dude. Nothing fancy. It's a carbonated water. So, released a video. The first thing I want to cover is this video that I released yesterday. I got so many questions about it. And guys, I apologize about the audio. Seems like I'm just plagued with audio problems right now. I tried to do something by putting music into the video. Obviously, it didn't work out because I didn't get the audio levels right. It was a pain in the butt. That's why I like to keep my videos pretty plain and simple where I don't have to go with anything crazy. So, you know, I'll try to take a little more time with the audio and, you know, if I do audio again, I'll try to make it work a little bit better. But the first thing I want to cover tonight is in my video yesterday. I had a walk-in freezer where we had all kinds of problems with it. And what I found was the twist timer had failed, okay? I want to cover what that twist timer was because I can't tell you how many times I typed out a response to that answer. It must have been 10, maybe more times. And I finally stopped typing out the answer and just told everybody I'll talk about it in the stream tonight, okay? So I had a walk-in freezer yesterday, or at least on the video yesterday, where we had a complaint that it wasn't working, and when I arrived, the unit was working, okay? And what I found was that the twist timer on the outside of the door, so we have a pump down twist timer, okay? And what it is it solves the problem, and I installed that, but I'm not going to take credit for coming up with that idea. It was, I first saw it on a Hartford Duracool walk-in. I'm sure other people came up with the idea too, but essentially on the outside of the door, right next to the light switch, is a 15-minute twist timer. And when you twist on it, it actually breaks the circuit for the neutral wire for the coil, okay? And it basically makes the system pump down. It disconnects the liquid line solenoid valve electrically, and because it's the neutral or the common wire, I shouldn't say neutral, it's the common wire. Because it's the common wire, it disconnects power to the evaporator fan motors too. So the system goes into an immediate pump down. The evaporator fan motors turn off, and then the liquid line solenoid valve turns off, and the system pumps down. The reason why we do this is because we have a lot of nuisance service calls at a lot of locations, because I deal with 99% of my stuff is restaurants, where we get walk-in freezers that are iced up. I don't know if you guys have noticed a trend, but majority of my videos, I have like ridiculous amount of videos on de-icing a walk-in freezer. Excuse me. And a lot of times it's because people are leaving doors open or different things like that. So we use that pump down twist timer. It's a special twist timer, okay? It's made by Intermatic, and you can't get it from Home Depot or the supply houses. You have to order it, at least at my supply houses, you have to special order it. I will tell you guys that it's an Intermatic, and the part number is FF, so that's Frank 315 Mary, okay? And it is a 15-minute double pull, double throw twist timer. So you can use it to turn something on for 15 minutes, or you can use it to turn something off for 15 minutes. So in our case, we use it to turn the common leg off for 15 minutes. And the cool thing about it is that the tricky thing about it is that 15-minute interval, because you can find 30-minute, you can find hour, 2-hour intervaled ones, but nobody wants to shut off their walk-in freezer for 2 hours basically. So by doing a 15-minute time, 15 minutes is not going to hurt anything. And so at my restaurants, what we typically do is we train the kitchen staff and we let the managers know, because usually the managers are sick and tired of paying for us to defrost walk-in freezers, and they basically are agree to us putting that twist timer in. And then so anytime the cooks are all trained, anytime they open that door, boom, they turn the twist timer, okay? And in our situation, the twist timer was failing, okay? And it was just not keeping time anymore. So like I showed, or I think I mentioned in the video, what I did was I had a hunch that was the problem, because the box was, I had just turned it, when I arrived, the fans were off and I turned it and the fans came on. But what I did was I turned it the full 15-minute interval and then started my stopwatch while I was troubleshooting the rest of the unit, and noticed that it was taking a lot longer than 15 minutes for it to turn the evaporator fan motors back on, okay? So hopefully that clears what that twist timer is. It has nothing to do with, it's not a temperature controller. I got those questions. It's not turning off, just turning off the fans. It's not doing that. It's a pump down twist timer, okay? Kind of like a pump down switch that sometimes you'll see on, convenience store condensing units on the roof or stuff like that, okay? So this one, I just literally ran a piece of seal tight conduit to the evaporator coil, grabbed the neutral wire as it was, or the common wire, I keep calling it neutral, the common wire, as it was going to the evaporator, interrupted it, ran it through that switch, and then back, okay? So that's all that it is. So another question about that video too that I got was how I changed that pressure control. Guys, you got to remember something, okay? You can't always be perfect, all right? And so in that situation, I pumped the system down to a low pressure, about 9 PSI, and then I call it a hot swap. I hot swapped that pressure control while the system was still under pressure, okay? Sometimes you got to do that. It was a Friday night, or no, it wasn't a Friday night. I actually returned, but sometimes you just do that because I was being lazy and I didn't want to recover the whole charge or pump the system down and have to change the dryer. That was the whole point, was not wanting to change the dryer. I was being lazy. It happens every once in a while. It is what it is, okay? So unfortunately, you can't really do that on a high pressure control because high pressure controls, you can't pump the system down on the high side, basically, okay, unless the pressure control was on the liquid line. But on a low pressure control, that's something that I do. And yes, I realize that there's a negligible amount of air inside that capillary tube. It's going to be okay, all right? Again, I'm not perfect, guys. I like to show to you guys that, there's what you read in a book, there's what you learn in school, and then there's sometimes what you got to kind of do to get things done sometimes, okay? So am I perfect for doing that? No way, okay? Do I recommend you guys all do that? That one's your decision to make, whether or not you do a system like that, okay? You guys can make those choices. Don't just do it just because you saw it on one of my videos. So, all right. Human Rights Revolution, I'm going to answer this question. You says, is it possible to check for 24 volts at the thermostat with no comm? And there's a couple different ways you can go about that, but the simple answer is not really, unless the transformer on the roof is grounded and you have a good ground down at the thing. But yes, it's a difficult thing when you're dealing with the older residential style thermostats, okay? It can be kind of hard. I'm saying, are you checking proper 24 volts power, okay? It's a little difficult to do. Okay, so let's see what else. And maybe someone can chime in here and tell me something that I don't know, okay? I do not know everything, so... okay, so here's a good one. Scott Lawrenson, is there an advantage in a pump down system over a temperature shutoff system? And this is something I've been thinking about lately because I've read conflicting arguments for both ways, okay? So there's older systems where you have a temperature controller and it literally just shuts off the compressor. Like line voltage runs through the temperature controller, or you just run it to the contactor for the compressor, okay? I've seen that before. It's older school systems. The advantage to using a pump down system and having like the temperature controller and or the time clock pumping the system down when they're on the off cycle is that you have less chance of refrigerant migration. Okay, you have less chance of slugging the compressor on startup. You have less chance of oil migrating in the system if you have a pump down system. Okay, so preferably, I prefer to have a pump down system when and if possible. Okay, I really don't see many systems out there that just shut off the compressor contactor anymore. But I do see it a lot on defrost, where we have like like for instance the Tecumseh condensing units. We're not on a walk-in cooler. We're typically not running solenoid valve control voltage up to the roof to the time clock to shut it off. So oftentimes we will just shut off the compressor. Is it perfect? No. Okay. And in fact, over at HVAC school, Brian had written an article recently about, or actually I think one of his guys wrote the article, or maybe they made the video anyways, but they had mentioned about, the disadvantage to having a defrost time clock turning off the system at the compressor contactor and how that could cause problems. So, but I have also read arguments, and again, I don't know, I'm not going to say, anyways, I've read also arguments about the strain that a pump down does on a system every single cycle, and that it actually strains the system. Now, whether or not there's any truth to that, I don't know. I mean, I see a lot of systems pump down, and I really haven't seen any problems from it. But I have read some articles where people talk about the strain on the compressor from having to pump down consistently all the time. And if you think about it, on a walk-in cooler, that thing might pump down, gosh, I could only imagine how many times in a day the system might pump down, maybe 100 times or something like that. I mean, it depends on how it was sized and what kind of load is on the box. But so, there's both ways. I'm not going to say which way is right or which way is wrong. I typically use a pump down system. So, all right, let's see what I'm missing here. Do all makeup air units have heat? No, not necessarily, Nathan. I have a lot of makeup air units. In fact, we here in Southern California, we're typically a dry climate unless we're by the coast. And a lot of times we have swamp coolers, evaporative coolers as a makeup air unit. That's it. It's just a swamp cooler because we have such a dry heat that we can use an evaporative cooler as a makeup air unit. There's no heat on them. Now, we do have a few makeup air units that have heat, and I have seen makeup air units that have dehumidification on them via basically they have an evaporator in them and condensing units on the top, and it's there to temper the air and dehumidify it before it brings it back into the building. But we don't have a huge need for that here in Southern California. We have some use cases where it could be needed, like such out in the Coachella Valley, the Palm Springs area, because during the summer months they get monsoonal moisture, so we get relatively high humidity. What is high humidity to us out here on the West Coast, you guys in the Midwest would laugh at, and down south, because if we hit 50 to 60% humidity, we're losing our minds here. So on a regular, we're like in the 20% humidity range. That's typical for us. So when we get our monsoonal moisture come through and our thunderstorms and whatnot, we'll hit 50, 60% humidity, and we're losing our minds because it's still 120 degrees out there in the Coachella Valley. And then they have 60% humidity. It just seems so unbearable for us. But, it's interesting. We don't even know what humidity is out here, So, all right. I want to get... oh yeah, it is an old school trick, prime time. Okay, so I want to get to some of the topics that I have on my sheet right here, and then I'll get to some more of your guys' questions, okay? So let's go into here. I'm still like all twisted up because of the way that the stream started. That's still like agitating me. It's hard for me to get over things. All right, so let me see. Oh, another, this is a question I get on a regular, guys. A big time regular is people asking me about my wedding ring. I wear a wedding ring when I'm at work. Guys, and I get the comment, I can't tell you how many times, oh my gosh, you shouldn't wear a wedding ring. You're going to get electrocuted, or your finger's going to get caught and it's going to get ripped off. It's a rubber ring, guys. It's a silicone ring made by Quelo. It's the more expensive one, but there's not necessarily a need to have the Quelo one. But I am very concerned. I stopped wearing my wedding ring many years ago, and I felt naked without it. And then I found these silicone rings by Quelo, and they're basically breakaways. So, I mean, if you got caught in something, it would rip the ring off before it would rip your finger off. So I highly suggest you guys look into getting those if you do wear a wedding band when you're working, because the metal, ones, they're nice and fancy. And then on top of that, I've had my wedding band refinished. It probably doesn't even fit my fat hands anymore, but, I've had my wedding band refinished so many times that they can't even make it look like it looked when it was brand new. It's been sanded down so many times to get rid of the scratches and stuff. So that's another thing too. You can keep your wedding band a lot nicer if you have a fancy one. Personally, if I had to do it all over again, I don't know about you guys. I'm not a very materialistic person. I'd have been fine with this rubber ring from the beginning. I don't need no $600, $800 wedding ring. It just seems like, but to each their own. That's just knowing what I know now. I don't need that big old fancy thing, because that fancy ring that I bought is sitting in a drawer and it doesn't even fit my hand anymore. So, yeah, exactly, guys. I see you guys commenting about the humidity. So yeah, we do not know what humidity is here. So, all right. I'm going to get to a couple more things. For some reason, the chat is on a there's a pretty good delay right now. So for instance, Superior, I'm seeing your comment right now, which is interesting because you typed it a minute ago, but I see there's a pretty good delay on the chat today. So, okay, so let's see what else we got here. Yeah. All right, let's go into here. Proper gloves for refrigerant handling. This was an interesting one that someone had brought up, and they asked me, hey, they see different people in different videos using rubber gloves, using, whatever gloves, or using no gloves. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't wear gloves very often. Every once in a while I put on rubber gloves, and I've recently, within the last 3 to 4 years, started wearing rubber gloves a lot, just because I realize that my hands stay a lot cleaner when I wear rubber gloves. But they tend to get really, pruny and stuff, and you sweat in them a lot. But I definitely don't follow all the proper PPE rules. I don't wear protective equipment like I should. And I strongly urge you guys to wear whatever protective equipment you're required to wear, and or whatever makes you feel comfortable about working in the hazardous stuff that we do. Okay. But do I wear big old leather gloves when I'm putting on refrigerant gauges? No. And the problem is that I find with all those gloves, if you have no dexterity, you can't get your hands down and twist on stuff, DM Locksmith. Yes, I wear the Black Mamba gloves. I get them from True Tech Tools. Actually, they have a really good deal, and you can use the Shop Talk offer code, and you can get 8% off of the Black Mamba gloves. And I think they come out to be like $11 a box or something like that. So great price on the Black Mambas. I will get to your question here in just a minute, Johnny boy. Don't just keep posting it, bud. You're not gonna irritate me. Okay, so as far as the gloves, I don't wear big old rubber gloves or anything like that for putting on gauges. The biggest thing, and so I've got an apprentice working with me right now, and the biggest thing I tell him is, look, I need you to try your hardest to make sure that you don't have refrigerant leaks everywhere. But you also got to know when to step back and just let it go. Okay. So what I'm saying is sometimes, you go to take something off, especially on 410A. Like the other day, I was going to take my smart probes off of 410A, and my smart probe was having a hard time because of the angle it was in. I couldn't untwist it fast enough, and there was refrigerant blowing out. Ironically, the system was overcharged, and I promise you, I wasn't venting refrigerant purposely, but it just so happened that by the time I got that thing shut, it wasn't overcharged anymore. So, sometimes you just got to know. And I had thought about it when I was screwing that thing, that access valve on the smart probe, trying to screw it back, or unscrew it is what I was trying to do. And as I was trying to take it off, and as I was doing that, I couldn't, it was starting to scare me, and I was about ready to just let it go because I didn't want to burn my hand really bad. So you have to know when to just stop so that you don't hurt yourself. Okay. So, what's the proper gloves to wear? It's whatever you're comfortable with, or whatever your company requires you to wear is all that I'm going to tell you. Okay. So to each their own on that one. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Prime time. All right. Your girlfriend is about to give birth and you're over here. Tito. Right on, bud. All right. Okay, so let's see what else I got going on here. Oh, this is a good one. So the question I had was, how do you read suction superheat? Okay, so obviously in order to get suction superheat, you've got to clamp your temperature clamp on the suction line, right? But on walk-in freezers, we run into an interesting problem, okay? Because walk-in freezers, on a properly operating walk-in freezer, it's not uncommon to see ice on the suction line. So how do you get a proper superheat reading if your suction line's covered in ice? that's a difficult one. Unfortunately, you're going to need to either find the best place to grab it, but inevitably the insulation should be keeping that ice back, okay? But if it's not, you're just going to need to either defrost a section where you can get your clamp on there, or what I will typically do if you can is go find a piece that actually has insulation on it, because more than likely there's not going to be ice underneath the insulation. So you can just cut back a small piece of the insulation or just cut one slit in it to where you can get a temperature clamp on it. But if you can't find a place, you're just going to have to defrost the suction line until you can get your clamp on there. That's just something you got to do. I would strongly urge you guys, if you haven't already, even if you're not using the Fieldpiece temperature clamps, I would strongly urge you guys to make sure that you're sanding down your suction lines when you're putting temperature clamps on them. That goes for air conditioning or for anything. No matter what temperature clamp you're using, I strongly suggest that you guys consider sanding those things down and getting a nice, good bond with the copper. I feel a lot more comfortable when I sand those lines down to get a good bond on there, okay? While I'm talking about that, the next thing that I wanted to talk on my list, and I'll get to some questions here in just a sec, is temperature clamps, okay? If you're using temperature clamps, you got to make sure that and I've harped about this in the past a lot, but you got to make sure you're calibrating your temperature clamps, whatever you're using, okay? K-type thermocouples are very, very good, and they're very inexpensive for the most part. But K-type thermocouples are the clamps that typically, come with your Fieldpiece meter, and it's got a little yellow K-type thermocouple. Or if you're using a Fluke 52, which is what I use for temperature measurements a lot of times with reach-in coolers, it's got a K-type thermocouple sensor on it. And you got to make sure you're checking the calibration of those sensors before you measure anything. So you got to use some ice water. Ice water should be 32 degrees. Technically, you're supposed to use crushed ice, agitate it, stick the clamp down in there. It should read 32 degrees. Okay. And then take your measurements. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get a couple of these questions answered in here. So there was one that someone was asking me. Okay. So Mr. Johnny Boy, you said, what are the alarms for in the walk-in coolers? Mr. Johnny Boy, what alarms are you talking about? Because there's a bunch. That's a really open-ended question, Mr. Johnny Boy. Is it something you saw in my video? So I'm just going to cover different types of alarms, and then maybe if I see something chime in the chat that you're asking me, then I'll know a little bit more, okay? But on a walk-in cooler, we've got a couple different type of alarms, okay? A lot of times, one of the ones that scares me the most is walk-in coolers, and sometimes walk-in freezers will tend to have a panic alarm in them, depending on, especially if you're working in chain restaurants. That's something that we see a lot. So we'll have a panic alarm inside that walk-in cooler, and what it does is if the restaurant was to ever get robbed, it makes the walk-in cooler a safe room. So typically what they'll do is they'll have a deadbolt on the inside of the walk-in cooler, so that way you can lock the door shut, and then you can hit a panic alarm. It's a little silent alarm, basically, and it calls the police. It doesn't set off a building alarm, audible, screaming, chirping. It just basically sends a silent alarm to the police. That's one type of alarm that you'll see in a walk-in cooler or a walk-in freezer. Then we can have like door alarms. We can have alarms that monitor the temperatures inside the walk-in coolers or freezers. Those are very common ones. Sometimes they might go to an auto dialer or be connected to the internet to send emails. They might just alert management, hey, the temperature is getting kind of high. Sometimes I've installed door alarms where we have a problem with customers shutting doors and we didn't install one of those twist timers, so we'll just put an audible door alarm that screams at them if the door is left open for a predetermined amount of time. So there's a Dixel controller that I've used before. I've used it in some of my videos where I install, and it's a temperature, it's a digital thermostat basically, or digital temperature gauge. I don't know why I can't think of digital thermometer. Sorry. And then also it has an alarm function that if the door magnet basically senses that the door's open for, 15 minutes, then it sets off a screaming alarm until someone goes in there and shuts the door. So hopefully that answers. Okay, so I see Mr. Johnny Boy said no, like when the temperature is above normal. Yeah, so we just have different types of alarms, kind of like what I just described. So that same door alarm that I talked about, we can also set it up to monitor temperatures inside the box too. There's all kinds of different functions, okay? And you can set it to basically, if the temperature inside the box climbs above a certain set point, whatever you tell it to, for X number of minutes, then we can set it to close a contact and send an alarm to whoever you want to. When I worked worked in hospital refrigeration, which I don't do anymore, but when I was doing some work for them, we had alarms, temperature alarms that would call their alarm company, essentially call ADT and say, hey, ADT would get a notice that we have a high temperature on this lab cooler, lab freezer, and then they would call and dispatch the right people. So a lot of times when you're working in the hospitals, you know, the nurses and whatnot, they typically aren't really concerned with alarms on equipment and stuff like that, because it's usually not going off to them. It's usually being sent to a building automation company or someone that's monitoring it, and then they'll call the engineering department or whatnot. So, all right. Okay, so Ralph Halili said, can I explain more on how a dirty condenser frees up the evaporator coil and what kind of frost pattern it does? I think you're referring to a dirty evaporator coil and how that could potentially freeze up an evaporator coil. So, you know, basically it's all down to airflow. Okay. You have to have a certain amount of airflow. Your compressor, for the most part on normal systems, most systems out there, your compressor is going to continue to pump. Okay. It's going to continue to pull the suction gas back and push the discharge gas out. Okay. And it's basically made to make sure that we have proper airflow going through that evaporator so we can absorb heat. Well, if we don't have that airflow, we're still going to be trying to absorb heat. So what we're going to do is it's going to start bringing the saturation temperature lower and lower and lower because it doesn't have a heat load, and then you'll tend to get a freeze up. Okay, for the most part, if you have low airflow or if you have a dirty evaporator coil, for the most part, you're going to see a solid freeze up. Okay, not always, but it just really depends on certain situations. If one half of the evaporator is dirty and one half's not, then you might get an odd freeze pattern. Okay, the freeze patterns that I would be concerned most with, which you really need to start really worrying about, is if you only see half of your evaporator coil frozen up. That goes with walk-in coolers, freezers, air conditioners, or even a portion of the evaporator frozen up. Okay, that typically is probably going to be some kind of a metering device problem or low charge problem, something like that. Your whole evaporator is not getting used, essentially. Okay, but that could be, it could happen that way too with a dirty or clogged up evaporator. Dirty filters can also cause it. Okay, so all right, let's see. Okay, so I'm going to go hit my list right here. I had a question about pressure limiting TXVs. I did Dan T, I'll get to that here in just a second. I did cover on my last stream, I talked about pressure limiting expansion valves because I had a walk-in freezer where we had a pressure limiting TXV on it. Now, someone had asked me about what do you do if you can't change that pressure limiting TXV? So in my situation, the pressure wouldn't come high enough for the low pressure control to turn the system on because we had it set at like 30 PSI. Well, the pressure limiting TXV wasn't letting the pressure come above that 30 PSI. And our pressure control basically was set too high. So in that situation, a pressure limiting TXV is not bad, okay? It's just you got to understand the limitations to a pressure limiting TXV. And when I say pressure limiting TXV, it's really just the power head on the expansion valve. It has a pressure limiting element that doesn't allow on a Sporlan one on a 404 system. It wasn't allowing the suction pressure to come above the 30 to 35 PSI range. And we had the pressure control, the low pressure control set about 32, I think is what it was set for. So, and what I found, and that's why I made in the video, was that the pressure limiting, I should say power head on the TXV was acting as kind of like a crankcase pressure regulator, and it was, keeping the low pressure down. We do this to stop from overloading compressors basically when we have a high load. Okay, now the question was what happens, because I had mentioned that I was going to get rid of that and put in a normal non-pressure limiting power head on that TXV. But it was actually Sterling Archer from Paris that had asked me, what happens if you can't get rid of that TXV? Okay, well, then you just set your pressure control lower. And you also have to know that on pull downs, it's typically going to take a little bit longer for the box to come down to temperature because that suction pressure can't get up high enough. It's just going to take a little bit longer than if it didn't have that pressure limiting TXV. Now, he had also asked me about short cycling on scroll compressors. So what happens on a scroll compressor is they're not meant to be pumped into a vacuum. I mean, no compressor is really meant to be pumped into a vacuum, but we did use tests like that on reciprocating compressors in the past, especially the K-body Copeland compressors. There used to be a test if we were testing the suction valve or the suction reed inside the compressor, we would front seat the suction valve, watch how low it pulled, then wait to see if it held to see if the reed was leaking by. It's not really a super valuable test to use on on, you know, pot compressors or reciprocating compressors. A lot of the manufacturers tell you not to do that test anymore because they don't make them capable of pumping down that low, essentially, okay? So on a scroll compressor, though, because of the inner workings of the compressor, they're not meant to be pumped into a vacuum, okay? But we run that problem because on refrigeration systems, a lot of times the low pressure controls are set really low. And then every once in a while, you might have a low pressure control that fails, and then you might pull into a vacuum a little bit, okay? So what'll typically happen on the scroll compressors is they have an internal safety, like a kind of a pressure relief built into the compressor that basically will just kind of for a short second equalize out the pressures, okay? But it doesn't necessarily equal it out. It just basically gets it out of a vacuum, essentially, is what happens. And so what you'll see on a lot of equipment, especially, we're really seeing it a lot right now on Heatcraft equipment because they're walk-in condensers. They have encapsulated pressure controls. And if any of you guys are doing refrigeration, you know that the encapsulated pressure controls, those are the little peanut pressure controls that you can't adjust and you just screw them on the Schrader. They are never accurate. So if it says the cutout is 5 PSI, you're going to be lucky if it cuts out at 7 or if it cuts out at 2, okay? So what happens on a lot of the, I don't want to pick on Heatcraft right now because it also happens with other people too, but that's the one that I see it the most on their equipment that they're installing or that they're sending out. It'll pump down, it'll pull too low, and then that pressure relief inside the compressor will bleed the refrigerant by and kind of equalize out the pressures a little bit, and then the system will turn back on. And then it's a vicious cycle, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off. So the solution to that is just to set your low pressure controls higher. Typically on a scroll compressor, you don't want it pumping down past 10 PSI. That's my rule of thumb. So, you know, set your low pressure controls at 10 PSI, but there's also some limitations in that too, because it depends on what you're keeping in that system. If it's a walk-in freezer and ultra low, you know, it depends on what the evaporator temperature is. So there's other things you can do, time delays and stuff like that. So, all right, let's go into here. What are the advantages and disadvantages to using a TXV over an ERV? Do you mean an EXV, electronic expansion valve, Scott A? I'm assuming you mean a thermostatic expansion valve versus an electronic expansion valve. Do me a favor and give me a confirmation, Scott, so that way... thanks, Dallas. Yeah, so the floating seal, that is what that's called. And it won't seat, and then it lets the pressures bypass a little bit inside there. See? Everybody else knows more than me. So let's see what else we got. Scott A, give me a confirmation there, bud, if that's what you wanted me to answer there. Okay, yeah, okay. So in my opinion, okay, I'm stubborn and I don't like change, but I do appreciate some of the cool things we can do with electronic expansion valves. I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't use a lot of them yet. I've got probably about 15, maybe 20 systems out there that have electronic expansion valves. I appreciate the concept of them and I appreciate what they can do. I've read some interesting articles about them. The cool thing about electronic expansion valves is basically we don't have to overshoot anything anymore, okay? Because, you know, thermostatic expansion valves, they've come a long way from in the past, right? But in a nutshell, we're kind of overshooting them sometimes. You know, we're kind of setting the superheat, you know, it's gonna modulate, it's gonna range here and there, okay, and basically we're relying on a spring to adjust the superheat and make sure that the valve is maintaining the proper superheat, okay. But with an electronic expansion valve, the cool thing is a lot of times we set the superheat numbers even lower. So for instance, you know, on a walk-in cooler with an electronic expansion valve, you know, we might set the superheat down all the way down to 8 degrees, maybe 6 degrees. Okay. We're going to try to get the most use out of that evaporator coil. And we don't have to fear of the valves all of a sudden overfeeding, right? Because an electronic expansion valve is essentially a stepper. Well, that depends on what type of valve you're using, but if we're talking about a Sporlan valve, for the most part, they're a stepper motor. So it's just tap, 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 stepping down and always letting through that right amount of refrigerant, and they adjust on the fly really quick. So the advantage of using an electronic expansion valve is basically more accuracy. You're able to get more efficiency out of a system potentially that has an electronic expansion valve because you can get more use out of the evaporator coil without the worry of too low a superheat, and sending basically liquid back to that compressor. So we can get more use out of our evaporator coils. But the disadvantage to electronic expansion valves is that thermostatic expansion valves they basically work, right? There's no electronics. So, the weakness of the electronic stuff is the circuit boards and the sensors. What's one of the biggest things that fail when it comes to digital temperature controllers is not usually the relays and different things. And if it's not user error, for the most part, it's the sensors that go bad. The sensors, and that's, in my opinion, what the weakness is on the electronic stuff. Is we're definitely getting a lot better than we used to be, but we can get much more efficiency, in my opinion, and we can be more accurate with the digital stuff and with the electronic expansion valves. So, all right, okay, let's see what I got in here. Do EXVs still hunt like TXVs do? Not as much, Robbie G. You really don't get as much hunting. So long as the system's charged properly, electronic expansion valves, in my experience, they tend to be, you get less hunting, basically. But I mean, if you're getting a lot of hunting like a TXV, then, you might be got something going on there. You might have your suction line or your sensing bulb installed in the wrong spot. I mean, but, newer thermostatic expansion valves, they don't hunt as much, but it all depends on the situation you're in and what kind of a load you're dealing with and where it's strapped. But for the most part, electronic expansion valves have a lot more accuracy, a lot less hunting than a thermostatic. So, all right. Really appreciate it. All right, cool. So let's see what we going. Am I going to Area 51? No, sir. All right. Thanks, Justin. All right. We try to keep these comments, guys, in here kind of related to HVAC. So if you get something disconnected, it's probably because it really wasn't related to HVAC. Because again, we got so much going on in here. We're trying not to get too distracted. So, and trying to keep it on HVAC stuff. So why do Hoshizaki? Oh, this is a really good question. Human Rights Revolution. Why do Hoshizaki have clear and black hoses? Customer asked me why I didn't change the black hose. Okay, so this is an interesting question. I was in a Hoshizaki meeting one time, or a training class, and someone had asked the Hoshizaki trainer, why do you make your hoses clear? And the Hoshizaki trainer said, because if we didn't make them clear, you would never change them. And you could take that as kind of a double-edged sword. All right, so first off, if they were all black, you would never change them, because you wouldn't see the nastiness that was inside the hose. See, that nastiness still exists inside that hose. Now, why do they still use the black hose on some things? I don't know why they still use the black hose on some things. I imagine it's because it's hard to mold the clear hose in those right angles that you see the black hoses. For the most part, they use the silicone clear hose on the transport line that comes from the water pump up to the distribution rails on the Hoshizakis, but then it goes black to the distribution rails. I would think that they might have technology where they can do it all in clear, but I did like the Hoshizaki guys' answers, because if they made them all black, then we would never change them. And, you see that as a way that Hoshi wants to sell parts, but I see it as the way of we wouldn't see the nastiness that's inside the hoses. So you got to look at it like that too. All right. Let's see what we got here. Why do capacitors fail? Mr. Johnny Boy. There's a lot of things that lead to capacitors failing there, okay? I would say that one of the biggest problems is probably, that's an interesting question. So why do capacitors fail? I would say a lot probably have to do with electricity problems coming in. But I would say that some of it probably has to do with lack of proper preventative maintenance. And then some of it might have to do with, just a cheap capacitor. We have a lot of restrictions on the chemicals that we used to use in capacitors. They used to use, I believe they were called PCBs, and they were very, very durable, and they hardly ever failed, okay? But the capacitors we have these days, they fail quite regularly. I'd highly suggest you look into, I have no affiliation with these guys, but I really do appreciate the capacitors that Amrad is making. Amrad is the company that makes the turbo capacitors, turbolytic capacitors, the start and the run caps, but I like theirs. They seem to last quite a while, and I believe that they might be American made, so pretty cool if you guys can use them, the Amrad capacitors. All right. Okay, so Trevor D. Bernardi, you said with R22 being phased out, is it going to force people to replace units in the future? You know, that's an interesting question. I think that without getting too political, I think that that's the goal of a lot of people that are putting in these restrictions about banning refrigerants is, you know, they want you to change out your equipment. Now, there's an argument to be made about how some of these different refrigerants are hazardous to our health and us breathing them in when they're leaking out. There's some arguments to be made about environmental problems that they cause, whether or not they actually hurt the ozone layer or whatever. I don't want to get political about all that stuff, but inevitably, yes, it's going to make people replace their equipment. Ironically, we still have a ton of R22 equipment here in Southern California, and so does the rest of the country, right? But now they're already talking about phasing out R410A. R410A was the replacement for R22. What's also interesting too is when they decided to use R410A as the replacement gas for R22, they already knew they were phasing it out. So now we're already talking about phasing out the replacement gas when we still have some of the R22 systems out there. I still have a lot of R22 systems out there. That's a whole nother thing to worry about. So, all right, let's see what else we got here. Everything today is junk. That is true. There's a lot of equipment out there that's definitely not made like it used to be made. So, all right, let's see what else we got. What other questions we got in here? How can you figure out if you have low oil issue on a scroll with no sight glass? Tyler Davis, that is to repeat what DM Locksmith. Okay, so DM Locksmith had asked that too. That is a really difficult question, okay? I really feel that all scroll compressors should have a sight glass on them. And, you know, there's things that, wow, total, is that HVAC North? Yeah, thanks, bud. I really appreciate it, man. That was really cool. Awesome. Thanks for the super chat, dude. So, you know, I think that all scroll compressors should have sight glasses. I think that it's very important for a sight glass to be on there. And, you know, some things that you can, it's very difficult to know for sure whether or not the system has oil, okay? You can kind of monitor the vital signs of the compressor. You can check the amp draws. You can listen to the sounds that it's making. And this is actually segueing into another thing I want to talk about too, but it's really hard to tell for sure. You know, I'd be kind of curious to think and wonder if you could see oil levels with a thermal imaging camera. That'd be an interesting one. I don't know if you can, because I think I've proved that you can't see the liquid levels very well on a liquid line receiver. I've tried that with a thermal imaging camera with the refrigerant in it. So I'd be kind of curious to know if you can see a difference in a scroll compressor that's low on oil and that's has proper oil using a thermal imaging camera. Maybe you can see that the components in it are getting hotter than usual. I imagine that one of the tests that you could do to test whether or not a compressor is operating properly is just the basic safety tests on a compressor, but temp the discharge line, because a lot of times, I believe, don't quote me on this, but isn't Copeland's number 225? For some reason, I thought it was 225 is Copeland's number. I could be wrong on that, but Copeland has a spec number there. DJ Sub Air, thank you very much, man. Really appreciate the super chat. That's really awesome of you. So yeah, okay, let's see what else we got going on here. Oh, hey guys, everybody's been asking, and it's not all official yet, but yes, I will, Tito209. I will definitely get to that. That's on my list right here. So I will address the fact that everybody keeps asking me about the shirts, and the shirts are coming, guys. I'm going to show you guys the back of the shirt. This is the official shirt that I'm going to be releasing. I actually just placed a huge order for like 140 of them. So hopefully they sell, because I just spent an arm and a leg on ordering these shirts. And I got hats coming too, so they'll be here soon. But I'll show you guys the back of the shirt. They're going to come in different colors. They're going to be black, this gray color that I'm wearing, and then there's going to be a white one too for now. And maybe later we can work on some different designs. But yeah, those, I will have them eventually. I got a lot of fires going right now, but I got someone trying to work on a website for me and different things. So I got to find a place to be able to sell the shirts. So they will be coming. I did place an order for them. And like I said, hats will be coming too. I ordered some hats, and I'm going to show you guys something here. Hold on. I ordered some hats, and this is because I'm crazy, right? And I'm constantly trying to make sure that what I put out there would be something that I would want to buy. So, and this is my problem. So this is my hat. It's really simple. It just says HVACR. That's all, okay? Because I wanted these to be able to be worn by other people. But can you guys see how there's a point right here? this is the stuff that drives me nuts, and this is why it's taking me so long to find this. There's a point at which the hat comes up right here, and it's the style of hat. I don't know if you guys can see it. I don't know. It's hard to see. It looks like I'm a unicorn when I'm wearing the hat, so I'm not using that hat. I'm still going to use the design with the HVACR on it, but I just ordered a different style. So it's taken me so long. Same thing with the shirts. It took me a long time to get to this shirt, and it just took me a long time to get to it. And I finally got to it, and I finally have a design that I like, but I bought so many other different designs, basically samples and different things. Ironically, when you're ordering a crap load of shirts, samples still cost you money. That's a whole thing. So, all right. So those will be coming soon. Working on it. Okay. Let's see what else. Okay. Okay. So I wanted to talk about, I'm going to get to the reach-ins with the cold rails. I'll get to that in just a minute. There was one other thing that I wanted to segue into. I'm looking through my thing right now. Cold rail systems. Okay. I'm just looking through my sheet. Topping on. Yeah, I'll just get to the cold rails. Okay. So, reach-in coolers in restaurants. A lot of times we have a cold rail on the top, okay? Or sometimes they just have air blowing up. And typically we have a drawer section or a door section where we can keep food underneath, and then they have pans up in the top so they can, it's a prep table. They can make hamburgers, whatever. They have all the condiments right there in the top. A lot of times we have temperature issues and we tend to struggle on the top sections, okay? Because you got to remember something, that the top is trying to, in the bottom of the reach-in, they've got food in there that's trying to overcome the infiltrating air through the 3-inch thick box with insulation in it. But in the top, there's nothing protecting the contents in that pan from the heat being absorbed into the food. So we tend to have to overcool those pans. So we will have like a cold rail in the top. Okay. Sometimes there's all different styles. A company called Kyrac used to use a pan chiller. They had rails, and then they had a fan motor, and it circulated air across the bottom. They had some problems with that. They've since went to like a glycol solution where they circulate glycol through there. Delafield has cold rails. They're static cold rails where there's no fans at all, and it's just a frosty rail, and the pans have to make contact. Bunch of different ways. One of the important things to understand is that almost every cold rail out there on a reach-in cooler is meant to operate in a kitchen that's less than 80 degrees. How many kitchens do you guys know out there that are less than 80 degrees in the cook's line? Not very many, okay? But ironically, all these different manufacturers are selling these restaurants boxes, and they're saying, oh yeah, it'll work great. And then you get out there and it won't work, okay? So number one, the heat in the kitchen affects everything about that box, okay? Especially on the cold rail. The cold rails are the first thing to fail usually. Even when there's a problem with the bottom, you tend to notice it in the cold rail because you've got all that infiltrating air on the top of the box, okay? So, I don't know why my audio's distorted, Adam. I'm having horrible audio issues today, so I don't know. I shouldn't. Yeah, my levels should be good. Huh, interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know. So, okay, so I see you said, Justin, it's a little bit loud. I don't know what it is, man. Let me go down. Hold on. See, my audio, thanks for telling me, guys. I really appreciate it. So let me adjust the levels down there. Hold on. That's very interesting. I'm going to try to, seems like this whole stream has been messed up. Huh. That's very interesting. Seems like I just need to chill out. Ugh. All right, cool. So anyways, hopefully that's a little bit better. But with the cold rails, yes, okay, the number one thing is that cold rails need to be full all the way, okay? So you can't have open spaces in the cold rail. You cannot have open spaces. There needs to be rails in between the pans. The pans need to be sitting on a surface. The pans need to be in good shape. That's like number one, okay? You can't have those spaces in there. It's just, I'm cursed, Nathan Peterson. So, okay, so I'm getting distracted here. But so with the cold rails, the other thing, so let's just say I'm working on a Delafield cold rail, okay? So a Delafield cold rail, one of the issues that I get all the time is that someone goes to the bottom section, because a lot of times the bottom sections are separate. It really depends. It's hard for me to generalize every single cold rail out there, but a lot of times the top is going to be one thing and the bottom is going to be another thing, okay? So what happens, nobody's being rude, superior, I don't know. Huh. Interesting. Okay. Um, yeah, I'm so getting distracted right now with everything. No, yeah, no more me eating the mic. Exactly. So, yeah, no, he's not being rude, Superior. He's just trying to help me out, man. No, I appreciate any feedback you guys can give me. So, but a lot of times on the Dell fields, what happens is someone will go down and crank the bottom temperature controller too cold, and then the bottom is constantly trying to run, and then the top struggles because these boxes, they typically aren't made. You know, for instance, on a Dell field, they put the cold rail and the bottom section on a tiny little compressor, and they struggle. So you have to make sure that the entire box is working properly to address issues first. So the first thing I do when I go to a reach-in that they're complaining about the pans working is I don't ignore the bottom section. I check the temperatures on the bottom. I make sure that the coils aren't iced up, that everything's working properly. Then once the bottom's working, then I jump to the top section and start checking temperatures. Manufacturers have different ways that they want you to check boxes. So for instance, on the top sections of a Dell field box, because there's no evaporator fan motors, it's like a static rail, meaning that there's just refrigerant lines and that's it. A lot of times they really won't tell you what the pressure should be, okay? And they want you to check by superheat. So if you know the system's operating properly on a Dell field unit, a lot of times they'll tell you to turn off the top section, check the pressures on the bottom, turn on the top section, turn off the bottom, and check the superheat on the top section and see where it's at. And so it differs from manufacturer to manufacturer. Another thing that constantly happens on the cold rails is air from air conditioning vents, makeup air unit vents, and heat lamps. You know, the heat from the heat lamp being directed down on that food, and that affects everything too. So you can't have direct air blowing on your food at what's the air blowing out of your air conditioning vent? 55 degrees, you know, depending on what your outdoor air temps are and what your return air temps are. So 55 degrees sounds like a decent supply air temp coming out your vents. So if you've got 55 degree air blowing directly on your food and the box is trying to maintain that food under 40 degrees, then you've got a problem. So making sure that you don't have air blowing on top of your food is a very, very important thing. So if you have more questions, I'd love to talk about it more. I'd like to know more specifically about boxes. Toller4652, thank you very much. Tito209, if you got... give me an email and we can talk more about the specific box you're working on. Maybe I can give some insight. I think I remember seeing your picture, but send me another email and we'll talk about it some more. So, all right. All right, let's see what else we got. Isaiah, you asked me my opinion on Hot Shot 2. Isaiah, I really don't have an opinion on those. Personally, I don't really use many of the alternative refrigerants. So I really have no opinion on Hot Shot 2. I've used Hot Shot, the original one, way in the past when we had a lot of R12 systems. Yeah, it works. There's a lot of misinformation about the blends and different types of refrigerants and replacement gases out there. So I would say follow the manufacturer's instructions, okay? But also remember, if the system has a TXV, it needs to have a clear sight glass or a solid column of liquid go into the expansion valve. Now, something you need to remember with a lot of these blends and replacement gases is they might have higher operating pressures. They might have more dense refrigerant or chemical mixtures inside of them. So there may be more things. It may not be as simple as just dropping the gas in there. You might have to put a bigger receiver on the system. You might have to do some other things. So using the concept of just clearing the sight glass and moving on doesn't always work, especially when you're using some of these drop-in gases. Back when we were doing a lot of R12 retrofits, a lot of times we would use 409A was the refrigerant that I would use all the time when we were doing a lot of R12 replacements. And with 409A, it was a drop-in, meaning you didn't have to change the expansion valve, okay, and you would just put the refrigerant in there. But what would happen is, because it was a 400 series refrigerant, it ran a little bit higher on the head pressure. The systems weren't necessarily designed for that refrigerant, and there wasn't enough space in the receiver, and the condenser wasn't big enough. So people would go in and charge to a clear sight glass, and then the compressor would be going off on internal overload, or it would be overamping. And it wasn't a problem with the refrigerant. It was just that people weren't really thinking about what they were doing, and they were just putting that gas in the system and assuming they could just drop it in and move on. Every drop-in has limitations. Every system out there has limitations, and you can't just... Jeremy, thank you very much, man. Really appreciate it. Every system out there, you can't just drop in this refrigerant and move on. You got to think about it. So if you're using any of the retrofits out there, you got to read what the manufacturer's instructions are. And you got to remember, you're still going to charge, you're still going to pay attention to what the manufacturer of the equipment says to do too. So there's a lot of limitations about the different gases. So really appreciate it, Jeremy. That was awesome. My opinion on leak lock, Josh Matthews, Blue Death. Used to use leak lock all day long. Used to use the stuff, but Blue Death is what we used to call leak lock, because it would be the death of you. By the time you got done putting it on that fitting, it would end up on your nose. It would end up on your ear. You'd scratch. That blue stuff went everywhere. Okay. My opinion on leak lock. I prefer Nylog. The reason why I like to use Nylog is because I'm an idiot and I cannot manage to not get leak lock all inside the system. Is there something wrong with someone using leak lock? No. If you know how to use it, to each their own, go for it, okay? But God forbid you get that leak lock inside the system. That is not good. You don't want to get it all over the flare nut to where it gets inside the actual, the refrigerant, inside the fitting, okay? So if someone was to use leak lock, I used it for years, never had problems because I knew how to use it, and I made sure, when you were using it, you put it 3 threads back, you only got it on the threads. The thing about leak lock, though, is that it hardens, okay? The thing I like about Nylog is that it's safe if it gets in the system. It's not going to be the end of the world because it's just refrigerant oil. So I prefer to use Nylog these days. You can use Nylog to lubricate a flare. It eliminates having to use oil. And then you can use Nylog. I use Nylog on the actual threads of the flare, too. So that way you could... So I use the Nylog on the threads, and then I don't have to worry about, the threads getting stuck when you're tightening the flare nuts on and different things. So I'm just not a fan of leak lock anymore. I used it for many, many years. To each their own. If someone likes to use it, go for it. I'd just be very, very careful to make sure you don't get it in the system. So, okay. What does cold in touch cap tube mean? I don't know what that, Ralph Halili. What does cold in touch cap tube mean to me? I don't really know what that means. That doesn't make sense to me, Ralph. Give me some more context, bud. What is the difference between red and blue Nylog? It's the red is meant for mineral oil and the blue is meant for polyester oil. So it's safe to use the blue on everything. I don't even think they make the red stuff anymore. I don't know. But we used to have red, and we would keep it on our trucks for anything with mineral oil, and then the blue would be for polyester oil. But the blue is safe to use on everything, so just buy the blue if you do have to buy one or the other. CFC and HCFC, there you go. But the blue will work for everything. So, okay, let's see what else. What's my opinion on straight air makeup versus AC makeup air? I prefer the air conditioned or conditioned makeup air, or they actually call it tempering the air. But I prefer some sort of conditioned makeup air because, like I said, out here in Southern California, we have a pretty good dry heat. And, a lot of times that dry heat is, even though, we might use a swamp cooler, so that would be a conditioned makeup air. But I prefer to use an actual DX coil. To where we could, okay, sorry, I got distracted there. If we used a DX coil, which is an actual air conditioned coil, then we could potentially, dehumidify at the same time. So Captive Air has some really cool smaller makeup air units. I've never actually used one, but they look really cool because they have 2 5-ton condensing units on it. They have 2 5-ton slab coils in them, and essentially they're going to temper the air. One thing to remember about those makeup air units that are conditioned, though, is that they're not an air conditioner. It's not meant to bring the space temp down because it's not recirculating air. The air is getting blown back out in the building. It's just tempering. So it's taking that 100-degree outside air, and it's just taking the heat out of it. So a lot of times you're going to be lucky if you get a makeup air unit that's blowing 78, 80-degree air on a 100-degree day. It's just tempering the air because it's a necessary evil that we have to put that air back into the building. So, all right. Let's see what else. Jay Lang. What shampoo do I use? It's not really going to answer that one, bud. I don't even know what shampoo I use. I don't even pay attention to that. My wife buys it. So, what's my opinion? Oh, because I already answered that one. Why would you have to use cool gas over hot gas? DM Locksmith. So I'm not super smart with the supermarket stuff. Okay. I do know that one of the supermarket manufacturers came out with the cool gas theory. Okay. But I do understand the concept of using cool gas versus hot gas. Okay. And there's some, I wish I could bring up this information, but there's some interesting stuff that says on hot gas systems, because of the expansion and contraction of the copper on a hot gas defrost system, you can see the defrost line flex. You can actually see it grow in length and shrink in length because of the contraction and expansion of the copper as it heats up and cools down. The reason why I bring that up is on a hot gas defrost system, hot gas defrost is actually really hard on the system. Those components are getting hit with that discharge gas. It's running all the way down to the evaporator coils. Then the evaporator coil is getting hit with that discharge gas. It's very harsh on the system. There's a lot of expansion and contraction that goes on. You can get leaks. You can have all kinds of problems. So one of the manufacturers, I don't know if it was Hussmann or someone came up with that cool gas theory where they were using cool gas instead of hot gas. And they typically just, for the most part, I think they take the gas off the top of the receiver and the vapor basically and run it through the evaporators. And it's really, my understanding is it's just a lot less harsh on the system. Interestingly enough, Manitowoc Ice Machines uses a cool vapor defrost. Okay, they call it their CVD condensing units. And on their Quiet Cube machines, they have a compressor on the roof, and they basically have they have cool vapor valves. I'm sorry, I had a brain fart there. They had cool vapor valves inside the head unit down on the ground inside the restaurant. And it basically diverts cool vapor from the top of the receiver to defrost the evaporators. And that's one of those situations too where they're reducing the amount of flex that's happening inside that evaporator when it's defrosting. Okay, so the theory is that you have a lot longer life on your equipment with the cool vapor defrost. Now, I've also read conflicting articles. Again, I'm not a supermarket genius. I've read conflicting articles about cool vapor versus hot gas and all kinds of different stuff. But on the ice machines, I like them. So, all right, let's see. Okay, let me see what else in a minute. Tempered air also keeps condensation from forming on the range hood, which is actually true. Yes, it does. So, okay. I'm going to go into my stuff right here. Oh, another thing, guys. The video that I released yesterday on the walk-in freezer. The second condenser fan motor. I know some of you guys already know this, but I can't tell you how many comments and questions I got. Dude, did you see that the condenser fan motor wasn't working? Yes, I saw that the condenser fan motor wasn't working. And I apologize for not explaining that in the video. Most people don't understand. I think like a mechanic that knows what's going on. And sometimes when I'm making these videos, I'm not thinking straight. Okay. And I assumed that people would know that that fan not running meant that it was cooler outside. And we have that fan on a fan cycle control. So simply the system pressures weren't high enough for that condenser fan motor to come on. There was nothing wrong with that condenser fan motor. It was just off on fan cycle. So, and I apologize for not explaining that in the video. I also apologize for the audio in the video, and I apologize for the audio today. I don't know what the heck is going on. So, knock it off. Ever work on a Copeland scroll with a solenoid unloader on the hot gas line? No, I haven't, dude. I've seen them, but I've never worked on them. So, okay, so Dan T, why do commercial reefers, that's a question I wanted to get to, I'm sorry. Why do commercial refrigeration and freezers pump down and AC does not, as far as you know? Well, Dan T, actually, so first off, let's see that most refrigeration systems have a long line set length, okay? They have a very, very long line set length. Air conditioning systems, like split systems, they can also have a long line set length too. And it actually, if you read in the technical data, usually if you go past a certain length, the manufacturer, if they approve the length increase, a lot of times they're going to have you add a liquid line solenoid valve. And it's not necessarily a pump down valve versus just a shutoff valve to prevent refrigerant migration. Okay. So refrigeration systems, for the most part, we're always worried about refrigerant migration because we have extreme temperatures. On an air conditioning system, you know, the difference between the roof and downstairs is usually a lower amount, right? You might have 100 degrees and 70 degrees, okay? But on a refrigeration system, we might have 100 degree rooftop temp, and we might have a negative 10 degree evaporator temp. And so we can tend to have refrigerant that's going to migrate to different places. So the whole theory of a pump down system is that we're preventing that refrigerant from migrating in the system, okay, and you're also trying to prevent oil from moving around and different things too. So, so like I said, most air conditioning systems out there, if you go beyond, like if you go to an installation manual and it'll say in the air conditioning, residential air conditioning, you basically don't want to go over this length of line set. Well, if you have to go over that length, you can do it. You just got to engineer some things. A lot of times you'll call the manufacturer and they'll say, okay, if you're going to go over that length, we want you to install a liquid line solenoid valve in the system. Okay. On a lot of commercial package or commercial split systems, they actually specify if the line set's going to be more than 100 foot, we want a liquid line solenoid valve. Basically, it's a stop valve to prevent the refrigerant from migrating back and forth. So, yeah, that was my bad, Anonymous. Yeah, I know. All right. Ever work on a, oh, I already answered that one. Okay. What's your opinion? It's mostly residential on single compressor, dual and triple stage condensing unit compressors. Jeremy. It's mostly hold on just a second. I don't know what question I'm missing there, Jeremy. I don't know what your question is, Jeremy. I don't understand the you said, what's your opinion? It's mostly residential on single compressor, dual. I don't know. I need some context to that question, Jeremy. Oh, right on, Brian. Yeah, I'm working on it, man. My stuff will come out soon. Hey there, Brent. How you doing? For those of you guys that are in here, people are just coming in right now. Some of them are talking about, I have shirts made. I just haven't, I need to set up a website and stuff. I just placed an order for shirts, so those will be coming soon, and I'll let you guys all know when I get a website set up. So, all right. Let's see. What else? Okay, so... Okay, you can do a pump down test through diagnostics on newer sub-zero refrigerators. Oh, okay. Yeah, I still use pump down tests often as a diagnostic. Basically, my problem with a pump down test, as long as it doesn't have a scroll compressor, is a lot of the newer compressors, they stopped making them capable of pumping down that low. So if you did a pump down test in the old school way, we would front seat the suction valve, watch the system pull down to -10 and see if it held. Well, there's some compressors out there that won't pull down to -10 from brand new. So you just got to have kind of a, you have to know how the system works and how to expect it. So if you're benchmarking a system or if you're commissioning it, sure, you do a pump down test in the beginning. So HVACR North, thanks again, man. I really appreciate it, dude. Really, really appreciate it. So, do I anneal hard copper for installs? Chris Cooley. Not really, man. I really don't anneal too much. Most of the time, I'll run if I have to. It's been a long time since I've ran hard drawn copper. For the most part, we're using soft copper quite often. I try to keep my line sets underneath the ceiling as much as possible and not on top of the roof. But when I do, yes, I have done hard drawn copper before. I would either use 90s. I typically won't anneal it just because I just never really do that. Sometimes I've been known to take a piece of soft copper, put a nice sweep on it, swage the ends, and braze it onto the hard copper. But I realize that you can anneal stuff. I just usually don't. So, all right. So do I work on any split AC systems, and what's the max tonnage you have worked on? Nathan, typically as far as the air conditioning systems, yes, I do work on some commercial split systems. I have some 15-ton commercial split systems out there. I think that's the biggest split system is a 15-ton that I have out there. And then I have a 35-ton package unit out there, but I really don't work on the big stuff past 35 tons. So for the most part, I'd say it's 20 tons and under is my norm that I'm working on. Not necessarily always split systems. Some of them just normal package units. So, all right. Oh, okay. I got you, Brian Milburn. Yeah, I didn't know where that was from. So, all right. So let's see what else. Oh, here's another question. Have I ever been electrocuted, and what did I learn from it? That was a really good question that came through. Yes, I have been electrocuted. Okay. What did I learn from it? I learned that I need to stop moving so fast, and I need to start to think about what I'm doing. I'm going to give you guys an example. This is going to go away from electricity. About 6 years ago, I fell off a roof. Okay. What I was doing was I was climbing up the roof. I had my Vito backpack on, and I was in a hurry. All right. I wasn't really thinking straight. And I also had I had my torches in my left hand, and I was climbing, grabbing the ladder one rung at a time. We've all done it, right? But I was doing a vertical ladder straight up and down. I was probably about 25 foot in the air. and I got to the top and I went to go grab the last rung. So mind you, each time I'm holding my torches in one hand, I have my Vito backpack on my backpack or my back, and I'm, hopping up one ladder at a time, one rung at a time. I went to go grab the last one. I missed it. So much went through my head when I fell backwards on that thing. As I was falling off the ladder, I swear to you, I thought, and it was literally a split second, but it really wasn't that much time. Okay. I thought, oh my gosh, I don't have enough money saved up to be on disability. I don't have money saved for my family. My life insurance policy wasn't enough. Like, all these different things went through my head. Dallas, thank you very much. Guys, we need to slow down and we need to think about ourselves. Now, everything was fine. I didn't fall the full 35 foot. It was kind of scary. I actually fell. There was a cage on top of the back dock of the restaurant. So I probably only fell 12 feet, and I landed on the chain link fence kind of as like a hammock. And I dropped my torches. My torches shattered. They didn't explode. Thank goodness. Okay. So the question about electricity, have I been shocked, and what did I take away from it? Yes, I've been shocked. And basically, it's not worth it, guys. Don't hurt yourselves. Take your time. Be careful. Don't let yourself push you too hard. I'm guilty of that. Nobody pushes me harder than I do myself. Okay. Nobody at the office is calling me saying, you need to finish, you need to finish. It's me going, I need to finish, I need to finish. So I'm my own worst enemy. But don't ever let anybody pressure you to do something that's going to hurt you. How did I get shocked? I've been shocked so many times. It's stupid. I don't even know how I got shocked. Okay. I've never been shocked anything higher than probably 208 volts, maybe one leg. No, not even 208 volts. It would have just been a 120 volt leg, because I've never been shocked by both sides of a 208 volt circuit. It's only been one side. It's not something you want to do. It's not something you want to do regularly. So what I took away from it was, I need to slow down because I have a family at home. It's not worth it to hurt myself or hurt someone else. And so you guys need to take that into consideration when you're working too. You need to be careful. You need to be cautious when we're doing stuff. So, all right. Let's go. What else? Especially capacitors. Yes, that's true. Do I work on inverter units? What's my opinion on them? No, I don't work on very many inverter units. I'm assuming that you mean variable refrigerant flow. No, I don't. I don't really work on any variable refrigerant flow. I think it's a great concept. I think it's cool. And I'm not going to trash on everybody, but I don't know if I quite buy the inverter systems where they're not slowing down the airflow, basically, such as what's the company out there that's making the variable condensing unit, but the evaporator airflow stays the same. Everybody was pushing it on all the different channels for the longest time. I don't know if I buy that split system where it's just slowing down the compressor. I don't know if I buy that. In my opinion, and again, I'm not an expert on inverter units, but in my opinion, if it's going to be an inverter driven compressor, you need to have a variable flow. Basically, it needs to be communicating, and the evaporator motor needs to slow down and speed up too. I think that that's the best thing you can do. If you've got a variable, full communicating inverter driven system and your evaporator slows down and speeds up too, I think that that's probably the best. I'm probably going to get emails from that one, guys. I do not have experience with them. That's just my opinion as an outsider looking in on the inverter systems. So there you go. It is Bosch. Okay. So, and I'm not talking crap. I just don't know how much I buy into that whole just slowing down the compressor, because you're going to run into problems in my opinion, but I could be completely wrong. So, okay. Please don't send me horrible emails, Bosch. So, okay. Robbie had a question, but not in caps. Let me go find Robbie's question. Where's Robbie's question? How do you feel about manufacturers selling cap tube coolers and freezers for cook line usage? I've heard cap tubes can't handle the load and should only be on storage purposes only. Robbie G, that's a great question. There's some truth in that. Cap tube systems do typically have a slower pull down time, but I will tell you that most prep tables out there, they're typically oversized evaporators, oversized condensing units, and typically oversized compressors. We tend to run higher temperature differentials on prep tables. So I can't really talk too much crap on capillary tubes, because if they're maintained properly, there was plenty of cap tube systems out there that have worked amazing for years. When they're not maintained properly, I think is when we run into most problems. Take, for example, the R134A plugging up cap tubes, right? Everybody knows if you use R134A on a cap tube system, you're going to have a restriction. But it's kind of a wives' tale. You're not going to have a restriction if you clean the condenser. It's really on the customer for not maintaining their equipment properly. Sometimes, depending on the kitchen, you might need to clean that condenser more than every 30 days. It just depends. So, you know, those systems are great. All right. I think that they're great. I think cap tubes are fine. Now, if you want to be able to ignore your system and run a dirty condenser and not maintain it as much, sure, you're probably going to have better luck with an expansion valve system. Okay. But is there really anything wrong with the capillary tube? Not in my opinion. Okay. We need to maintain our equipment more often. So, you know, can a cap tube system handle the load? I don't think it's so much that they can't handle the load. I think that someone's putting that box in a kitchen they shouldn't be putting it in. Kind of like when I was talking about the cold rails earlier. You know, you can't put a cap tube system in a kitchen that's 85 degrees and expect it to maintain proper temperatures. It's not designed to run in 85 degrees. In all reality, guys, those reach-ins are designed to run in a 70, 75 degree kitchen. Okay, yeah, to the extreme limits, they might operate in an 80 degree kitchen, but once they get hot, those things, they fall off the map. And I wouldn't say it's a fault of the manufacturer. Sure, there's some refrigeration manufacturers out there that suck. There's a lot of those Korean brands that have come in that just make horrible refrigerators, in my opinion. But yeah, we don't need to go off on a rant on them, so. Do I have safety meetings with my employees? Just Russ. I'm going to be honest and say we don't do enough of them. Yes, we do. What I will say that we do with our employees is every single morning, everybody comes to the office and we all start our day from the office. So we have a good 10 to 15 minutes. Not necessarily, sometimes we have it as a group. Sometimes one guy may be 15 minutes late or something, but we all do meet and kind of cover safety topics. So I guess, yes, we do safety meetings, but I mean, do I have a book that says safety meeting, all this different stuff? Officially, yes, I do. I have that safety book. So, you know, you get what I'm saying there. Okay, let's see what I got going on here. Never one hand a ladder. That's what ropes are for. Exactly. Knock it off. Since that day, I've started roping everything up. No more playing with ladders. So, only bitchy thing with cap tubes is if the unit has to be remote outside. Yeah, get rid of the cap tube if you're going to remote it. Just throw a 1/4 ton expansion valve on it and move away. Put a receiver on the condensing unit and call it a day. I've seen systems that people have remoted the cap tube system. I'm not saying it can't be done. You can remote a cap tube system, but boy, oh boy, do you have to do a lot of playing with that system to get it operating properly. So it's so easy just to throw a 1/4 ton TXV on it, put a receiver on the condensing unit. You don't even have to buy a new condensing unit. Just go buy a receiver. You know, go buy a 10-inch by 4-inch receiver, throw it up there on the roof, pipe that 1/4 inch liquid line right into it, and throw an expansion valve down on the coil and call it a day. So, oh, when your wife opens her bakery, you're going to have me design her kitchen. That's awesome, dude. Curious HVAC guy. Thank you very much, man. So guys, is actually, I just, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Thank you very much, man. I really appreciate it. What's my view of using subcoolant instead of sight glasses for liquid reference? Derek, it's so easy to use a sight glass, dude. But I mean, yes, you can use subcooling, but if the system has a receiver, you need to be very, very careful about using subcooling because where you're going to measure it, there's a lot of things. If you have a receiver, typically subcooling is something you look at, but it's not something you're really going to use as a charging metric for the most part. So, and never take someone's word that a breaker is off, measure it. Raymond Flowers is exactly correct. Guys, I am guilty of not being as safe as I should be with a lot of things. And breakers are one, man. These days, there's so many, I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, but there's so many stupid people out there. When I was coming up, you didn't even have to talk to anybody. People knew to stay away from a breaker panel. Nowadays, I'm so afraid. You need to lock stuff out. You need to use proper lockout gear because there's so many people that just come in and open breaker panels and just flip stuff on just because they see something off. Dude, that's so dangerous. You got to lock your stuff out these days because there's so many idiots out there. People are stupid. So, sorry. All right, let's see what else. How long will a walk-in cooler last for when the power is out? That's a good question, Mr. Johnny Boy. It really depends on the temperature on the outside of the box. I do not have a metric to tell you how long it's going to last. But, I mean, I've seen people with a walk-in freezer that died just before closing, and they didn't have me come in till the morning, and the food was still frozen. So, if you have good, most walk-in boxes are usually like a 6-inch or a 4-inch wall of insulation. So they have pretty good insulating value as long as the doors are being left shut. How do you calm myself down when job is a shit show or can figure something out? Oh, Ralph, dude, I am the worst at stress and anxiety, guys. I'm going to have a heart attack because of the anxiety that I go through. How do I calm myself down when a job is a shit show? I don't know, guys. I have a really hard time calming down. I get way overworked and amped up. I try to just chill out, take a breather. It sure would be nice if I smoked pot, but I don't. So that would probably help me with all my anxiety too. I just can't. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. All right, let's see what else. Okay, I'm going to get to, how many years have I been working as an HVAC tech? AK-47. I think it's 17 years, dude. So for those of you that don't know, I grew up in the trade. I grew up working for my father, okay? And my father and I work together to this day. So as a little kid from junior high on, even as in elementary school, I'd go to work with my dad on a regular. He'd come pick me up from my mom's house in Orange County, and I'd go to, run a couple calls with him before we went home. So I grew up all around the trade. In junior high, I started working a little bit more in the trade with him, working summers. I'd spend the whole summer basically changing filters and swamp cooler pads. It seems like that's all I did. Oiling bearings and greasing bearings and simple stuff, hosing off condensers. I officially started in 2001. It was April of 2001 is when I started, I think. So I think that's 17 years now. So, yeah, have a beer. Exactly. So, let's see. Yeah, I've Bill Purnett. I've heard of that stuff, man. They've got the CBD crap, and that's supposed to really, really help people with anxiety. I've thought about it. Everything's legal here in California now, but we can't be doing that stuff with operating machines. It doesn't matter how legal pot is. You can't have that stuff in your system for insurance reasons and different stuff. So, all right. Let's go see what else I got in here. Oh, this is another great one, guys. Someone had asked me, how the heck can I top off? I had a video way back, and someone commented on one from a long time ago. You see this, Adam? You see that? That's what's driving me nuts, Adam. It's probably the same thing with you, too. Put the mic there, and it drops down. Adam had emailed me earlier about this mic arm that I use. But, yeah, I'm having a hard time. I need to come up with a new mic holder. It's driving me nuts. It doesn't stay where you want it. So someone had asked me about 410A, and they said, how can you top off a system that had a leak in it with a 400 series refrigerant? Guys, 410A has an extremely low fractionization rate. It's I mean, seriously, I've topped off so many 410A systems. It's not a big deal, okay? In the very beginning, we were all worried about, oh my gosh, we can't top off a 410A system because, an ounce of refrigerant comes out and it's completely fractionated and it's trash. Not really the case. With 410A, we have a very, very low fractionization rate. I think that's how you say that. So it's safe to top off a 410A system, guys. So same thing with 404A. It's a blend too. You can't top off a blend. Yeah, you can. If it's something like 404 or 410, you're going to be fine. So, all right, guys. Let's try to, how long will it cool? I already answered that. So, yeah, there's a blue pill for that. So, any more questions, guys? Let's throw them in the chat. If not, we're going to go ahead and end this. So, let's throw some more chats in there or any more questions in there, and I'll try to get to them, guys. Sorry about the whole audio mess in the beginning of this. Hey, I'll show you guys that just came in right now. The shirts that are going to be coming out soon. So hold on just a sec. That's the back of the shirt. And it says on the very bottom in the writing, it says Big Picture Diagnoses. And yeah, so that's the shirt that I'm going to be working on. It'll be coming out soon. So, and then the front just has my, sorry, I don't know where that's at. The front has my snowflake icon on the front. So, and then the hats that I'm going to be coming out with, I got a new sample for the hat, but the hat's just going to say HVACR. We switched the colors so that the V and the A are switched. So the A is going to be blue and the V is going to be red. And then it's like a light blue color here. It just says HVACR. I wanted the hats that way because I wanted someone to be able to buy this hat and wear it at work and not be repping me. Like they could just wear an HVAC hat. So this just says HVACR. That'll be coming out. I've got a new style that I'm working on. I'm not going to end up with this design because of this weird pointy thing up in the front. Again, I'm just covering this, guys, because I don't know how much the shirts are, guys. I'm still going to work it all out. But the hat that I'm working on is supposed to be like a breathable material. So it's supposed to be like moisture wicking, whatever, some other crap. If you touch refrigerant, what happens to the skin? Mr. Johnny Boy, I mean, once you get calluses on your hands, refrigerant can burn just like boiling water, essentially, Mr. Johnny Boy. And so you have to be careful. But for the most part, if you have calluses on your hand, you're going to get a little bit of refrigerant on there. It's not going to be the end of the world. It's not like it's an acid that's going to eat your hand away or something like that. What's really dangerous is as the refrigerant's being released, it's boiling off and it gets extremely cold and it can burn you like dry ice. So, yeah, I really appreciate you guys. If you guys could get me, we're going to figure something out, Thanasis. Shipping to other countries is going to be difficult, but I will try to fix something. We'll figure something out because I know a lot of you guys are good supporters and you're from out of the country. So we'll definitely work on something. Does Manitowoc know about the front logo? No, that's my logo, man. Manitowoc can know all day long. That ain't no Manitowoc logo. Manitowoc uses a snowflake. Mine's colorful. So. Let's see what else we got. All right. All right, gents. What are they going to replace 410A with? Carrier has a name for it. Someone in here might already know. I don't know. I've heard that they're going to replace something, but yeah, I don't know what's with the trolls tonight. So you're basically having to work your butt off there, Justin. All right, gentlemen, we are going to wrap this up. I really appreciate you guys coming in here. I'm going to go ahead and, cue up the outro music and transition on over. When working with ice machines, do you still rely on the troubleshooting manuals a lot? Sure, man. I mean, I know a lot of it in my head, but yeah, I use the troubleshooting manuals so that way I don't have to remember so much information. I have some cheat sheets that I use too. You guys have probably seen them in my videos. But yeah, I still use the troubleshooting manuals. I try to do everything I can to avoid calling tech support because they take forever. Is there a better than other low pressure switches? Scott A, send me an email, bud. All right, guys. Hit me an email, hvacrvideos@gmail.com. I'm going to go ahead and transition out, and we will see you guys on the next one.